Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another week of Growing with my fellow growers. I'm your host, Jack Greenstock, joined as always by an amazing panel. I'm going to kick it over first to Spartan Grown.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, everybody. I'm Spartan Grown. You can find me on Instagram at Spartan Grown, all one word, no spaces. Or you can the best way is to reach me through email, and that's spartangrown@gmail.com. And I can help you with all of your cannabis growing questions, hopefully. Sorry about this blurry camera today. I can't fix this damn thing.
It's okay. But yeah, we're definitely going to be taking questions. So if people haven't already joined in, we've got Real Red Hairs and Weed Nerd DWC as the first few joining in. I see them in the live chat. Next up, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. MJ.
Hey, yeah, Dr. MJ Coco from CocoFreeCannabis.com. Excited to be back for another episode with you guys. So, yeah.
We're happy to have you back. And next up, we've got Matthew Gates.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. Looking forward to talking to everybody in the chat. We just got back from the San Diego Cannabis Cup from yesterday. That was pretty fun. And yeah, some of those people I think even watch the cheap home grow here. So if you do, sound off in the chat.
It's always cool to actually find out that, they're real people. It's not just a number on a dashboard or something. We've got the chatters, and I definitely recognize like the regulars out there. But when you see like, thousands or, even just 1,000, like we were talking a little bit about before the show, it's kind of a lot of people, even though it's not like the largest number ever. It's cool to realize that those people are out there and listening, and we can connect with them if we go to these events and things like that. But last and certainly not least, who's with us right now on the panel, Noah the Grower.
How's it going, everybody? Yeah, happy to be here and talk to you guys and get into it.
So this week we're going to be taking chat questions and doing some Q&A, but Matthew before the show was talking a little bit about how he just went to a Cannabis Cup, I believe, here in San Diego. So I'll pass it over to him, and then he could tell us a little bit about his experience there and maybe the number of people and the weather and all that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was at San Diego. This was the San Diego Cannabis Farmers Market, or at least the people who created it are associated with that group. My buddy Joshua Caruso. And yeah, it was about 1,000 people, which Spartan mentions very adroitly that it's actually not very much compared to a lot of other places. And it's because it's super restrictive here in Southern California. Not a whole lot of local cultivation. In fact, I got asked that question thrice. And I was like, yeah, no, there's really not a whole lot of that going on here, unfortunately. But it was really nice. You can find images and video on Instagram at the very least. They've been posting that up. Honeyflower Collective is another group that was associated with them. It was very fun. It was very cool because I think, Jack, you'll agree with me here. We've talked about it a few times, but like the San Diego or the Southern California cannabis community, at least to my mind, has always been kind of disjointed, not really connected. And there's a lot of practical reasons for why that is, but a lot of it's just the fact that there are people who are groups that aren't like commercial, of course, that don't have licenses and things like that. But even then, it's like there's these various smaller entities and groups, and they don't really come together as much as perhaps in other places. It was really nice. It was an awards ceremony, so I and a few other people got to make some input. In fact, I really liked that when I was coming around the other side of the event, I got some tickets that I was able to distribute to people. I didn't want to like walk all the way to the front of the event place. So I just asked like, hey, what if I was one of the judges? And the person's like, everyone was a judge, which is good. I actually really liked that response because there were a lot of people who were able to cast their ballots essentially and see what they like. So there was like an outdoor, an indoor, a home grow award. And they had these really nice wood carving, like burnt wood trophies.
Trophy.
Yeah. And then also there were some that were made out of, I didn't snag a picture. I should have. Like those like glass molds where you kind of have this like 3D image inside of this like block of like crystal or glass or whatever it is. So that was really cool. They had like cannabis flower, and it was very, very detailed, and then they had like the lettering and everything, like first place, second place, whatever you got. And yeah, so it was really very nice, very, very exciting, very motivating. to be able to see this sort of like collaboration, this coalescing of different groups, different people, many people who I recognize, several people. Some people, I had a few times where people were like, "Hey, are you Sync Angel?" I'm like, "Yeah, I am." And they're like, "Oh, I want to get a picture. I want to talk about, let's talk about some stuff." A few people who I've seen at other San Diego events that are smaller too. So it was just very, just a nice enjoyment that I had, very enjoyable experience. Yeah. So that's what I'll say about that.
It sounds like it was a good time. I actually had somebody reach out to me asking me to enter the home growers side of the cup, and time constraints and things like that, I just wasn't able to. And I think that they wanted a pretty good amount of weight so that a bunch of people could get samples. And most of my homegrown is enjoyed by myself and Lady Greenstock and a couple friends and things like that. So I always feel a little bit weird parting with, a good chunk of it, because I put a lot of heart and soul into it, and I have a really small operation. So I'm not really chasing the trophies or anything like that, or at least not yet. Maybe I will someday. But I enjoy the smoke. That's what really, really matters to me. And it's like so hard to replace something that I grew really well. So as much as I know I could maybe impress some of the people and judges, or maybe even get reamed, this is some mids or whatever. Then
well, I would definitely recommend nobody chase any trophies. And I do think that some people, like you make a good point. You have a very small operation, and some people were home grow just by dint of not being a commercial entity. But just because there's people who are growing in a smaller tent, and there's people who are growing in their 5-acre land up in Ramona or something. You know what I'm trying to say? So
well, I know, because most, if not all, I'd say like 97% of my friends in the cannabis community locally are non-permitted, operations. They're growing for themselves and whatever else they want to do with their things. But they're a lot larger operations than my own. And a lot of San Diego, I mean, from the groups that I've gotten connected with, it just seems like a lot of people are just kind of still underground doing their own thing. Some of them have moved.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to give Brandon Rust a chance to jump in, because he just not too recently, but went from San Diego to Oklahoma. So I know that's one of the options that growers in the area who were not able to get into the legal permitted scheme chose. But with that being said, Brandon Rust, welcome in.
Hey, what's going on, guys? I think it's been a minute since I've been here. I've been so busy, but I'm here and glad to be back with you guys all. And if you guys are interested in what I'm doing, you can check out the Bokashi Earthworks website at bokashiearthworks.com. All purchases over $50 are free now. Free shipping, I mean, I should say.
That'd be impressive. All orders over $50 are free.
That's the best deal I've ever heard of, man. That's awesome.
No, that's not very
but we have free
sustainable.
shipping now. I was fine. It was like, I'll tell you what, logistics is a freaking nightmare. And when it comes to products and like trying to figure all that out, both from a like coding and integration standpoint for the software part, it's a goddamn nightmare. Working with shipping companies and this and that, that's a nightmare, and their customer service. So I found the best thing to do is just add the cost into the product itself and then offer free shipping. It just works so much better.
I think that's how like a lot of modern websites are doing it now. Like even with Amazon, you're paying for Prime, but then it says free shipping. And then like I just looked at an item the other day. It was $19.99 direct from the manufacturer, but you'd have to pay like however much shipping. And then on Amazon, it was $29 with free shipping. So it would roughly equal out, I would guess about to the same.
Places that give away free shipping basically have to charge that in some place. I mean, shipping's a big expensive thing, so
It is.
somebody's got to pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, 50 Strands of Green, I'm shipping a paperback book, sometimes internationally. The international books are listed at $44. Half of that or more is the shipping cost. So that just puts into perspective, like literally, I'm trying to offer it as affordably as possible, but it's just like, it's a thick paperback book. So sending that, its weight and size are both difficult.
And it's better, you'll convert more sales. People like it better when you price it that way, as opposed to say like it's a $20 book and then they get like 3/4 of the way through the checkout process and they realize there's like a $24 fee for shipping, and like,
Yeah, I think
Screw
there's
that,
some kind of
like-
psychology that's associated with it,
Yep.
with an extra fee, where people are like, oh man, you know what?
100%. You
like
just
that.
got it. That's just the price up front, and they don't even want to know how much of that is the shipping cost.
People think of it as like a junk fee, but it's really like it is just the shipping. And I know like our president has rallied against that for like airlines, like that'll tack on, excise fee or whatever, credit card fee, an online order fee, and then like insurance that really like doesn't provide anything because they still cancel your fucking flight on you and don't get shit
It's
for
kind
it.
of
But
America. It's kind of a US thing where the prices aren't the actual prices. And see, like when you go in the grocery store and you see the price on a loaf of bread, that's not what you pay at the end. But if you go to a European, if you're over in Europe and you see a price, that's the price you fucking pay.
Well, with sales tax, we almost never include sales tax. In the
I know.
published
That's what I'm
price.
saying. It should just be the final price on there.
I'm like baffled by I don't understand how it's even legal that we have to give up so much of our fucking income. We have income taxes and the taxes.
Oh, I know,
on
dude.
fucking
It's like people don't
everything.
realize how much we're taxed. We're taxed.
Dude,
Taxation is theft.
well, before we get
This
too
is
deep
still
into
a
the
cannabis growing
anti-tax,
podcast, right?
yeah, I
like
got a
people
question
over
over
here.
here. Somebody thankfully copied into the Zoom. I just closed it down. Let's see, chat. And thank you to our lovely panelists. And this was Spartan Grown who copied a question from Okie Grower, who's been on many times in the past. So shout out to you, Okie Grower. Okie Grow, I should say. When drying, if you can't get your temps much lower, sorry, I've got a little thing popping up that I can't read the actual message now. Oh, much lower than 70 degrees. Would you still recommend 60 RH or should I change it? Pass that to whoever wants to take it first, I guess. I think Doc
Yes.
or
I'd say
Spartans.
yes.
Who? Me?
Spartans jumping in and then Doc, you can follow.
Go for it, Spartan.
I got a quick answer. Yes. Yes, I would recommend the 60% humidity.
Yeah, I pretty much would too.
Unless you're like
Um,
day of harvest, I might say 55, 50, 55 day of for a day or two and then to 60. But generally speaking, I would say 60. Yeah. Even
the
at 70
higher
degrees,
temperature is going to sort of encourage it to dry
too dry.
faster.
Yeah.
If you think about it in terms of dew point or absolute humidity, there's less moisture in the air at 60% RH and 70 degrees than there is at 60% RH and 60 degrees. So as a result of that, your plant's going to dry a little bit faster. But I don't think if you can't control temperature, I don't think it's worth raising your RH higher than that. I actually think that that's specifically dangerous. So, yeah.
Matthew,
Yeah,
do
I
you have any
agree with
thoughts?
that. Yeah, no, I basically what's already been said. If you go higher than that, I feel like you really run into risk. You're really tempting fate for some spores that you don't want to germinate, especially bud rot and that kind of a thing. So I definitely that's like the major critical one, right?
Yeah, for sure. And even 65, I mean, it's fine for the buds themselves to end up like 65 in a jar, but I wouldn't, when you're trying to dry them down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They can have a
And
lot
I
of
agree
excess
sort of with what
moisture.
Spartan said too. The first couple of days, I'm fine with being sort of lower than 60 RH when there's really zero chance that I'm going to over dry the bud because there's still a lot of moisture in the bud. And then up to 60 RH in that situation, I think would be okay.
Yeah, I was going to say that for the first 24 hours, I don't mind lowering it quite a bit myself. And then, I mean, it also just depends. If you're,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead.
I usually, like commercially, when I have a lot drying in a smaller space, I'll drop my RH down to like 45, 50. For the first couple of days, you know, because what it comes down to is the higher the humidity and the higher the temperature, the higher the microbial growth will be. If there's any type of, even if you don't have like botrytis or anything like that, it's just the nature of microbes and the fact that a lot of these things are ubiquitous and all over the environment in a stratophytic. Microorganisms will start to, colonize dying material.
Yeah, think of like Florida where it's like warm and wet. You've got everything just grows like algae, like different molds and mildews and everything really, not everything, but a lot of stuff grows and thrives there that we wouldn't want affiliated with our cannabis, specifically molds and mildews. And I think that I would definitely throw my hat in the ring of maybe 50 to 55% RH for that first day or two is no problem at all in my book. And then gradually raising it, 55 up to 60, but then not trying to get too much higher than that, because once you do, you significantly increase your risk. And some people are really worried about over drying, but I think you're better to be on the over dry end because you can always rehydrate it slightly than to, be completely filled with mold. In my experience, at least, that's what I would prefer, a little bit overly dried bud to a moldy bud any day. Although neither of them is ideal. You want to slow and low and control the dry as much as you can, and or cure, however you want to go about looking at it. Rowdy 420 says, at Brandon Rust, do you soak your seeds in anything special or just plain water?
No, I usually just use clean water, like whatever it is, RO or distilled water. And I just soak them for like 24 hours. And then I usually put them in soil, or I'll just put them in paper towels. I won't even soak them. I'll put them in wet paper towels, and I'll let them fully sprout and then transplant them. But typically what I do is I just throw them in water and I let them crack open, and then I put them in soil. It's the easiest way for me to do it.
Spartan Grown, do you have any thoughts for that question there? Do you soak your seeds in anything or just plain water?
No. I mean, there's evidence that it shows that it's beneficial to do seed soaks, and you can either go the sterile route, or you can go the microbial route, or you can go the humic acid and kelp and hormone route. But I'm with Brandon, man. It's like I love popping seeds. So when you like popping a lot of seeds, who's got the time to fuck around with all that? I've had very good success with just water and a fucking root riot cube, man. Water and root riot cubes, man. It works so good.
Well,
Yeah,
and
I
as the
think
cheap
that
home
there's
grower, we
like
want to cut out costs. So if we can eliminate using like a product like Herb Natural or some of these more expensive things that I've seen people try and soak their stuff to inoculate it, I will
I'm
admit I
just using
do.
tap water too, man. I'm not even. It's nothing special.
That's what I use for like 90%. I've looked at my local, water tests every single year when I get them. And I've grown with RO water versus my tap water side by side and tried to see if there was a major difference. And I came to the conclusion that it wasn't worth the effort, especially where I'm at. Like the city that I'm in takes a pretty good effort to make sure that their citizens have clean water. Thankfully, I know not everywhere is like that, but if you do the due diligence, you can find that your tap water is actually probably not only safe, but it might be beneficial. Like Doc has mentioned in the past with like EC balancing, you have a small load of certain stuff. It's not like it's going to feed your plants, but you aren't going to have to add as much into it. And you've got at least a tiny trace amounts of micronutrients and minerals and things like that.
Yeah, it can certainly help with pH buffering, so it doesn't sort of, you try to pH adjust RO water, you're just driving all over the map. So, but it depends on the source of your water. I think more in terms of an electrical conductivity issue. Some water is just kind of like coming out of the tap at 400 or 500 EC, and it's kind of tough to add a lot of nutrients to that if you're fertigating. Other than that, though, I definitely think you can use tap water. Seedlings and germination is one of the times that I do use bottled water, and it's usually not sort of RO, it's just filtered water. Again, it's just about sort of keeping it low electrical conductivity. That osmosis is very easy with that low electrical conductivity water. And I don't put anything else sort of in the imbibing water for seeds and germination. I do soak them for a couple hours after scuffing and before going into paper towels. I'm one of these people that Spartan can't stand that has 5 different steps to my germination protocol, but I get my seeds up and growing quickly. I try to have a really high germination sort of success rate. And, in my home grow, I'm only usually growing like 4 plants or like 8 plants or something max, right? So it's not really that much work. If you're growing hundreds of plants, that's a different situation. So, and cannabis seeds are also kind of expensive, right? Relative to other seeds that I grow. So I want to be sure that, I get as close to 100% success rate. And I kind of think that speed towards germination is one of the factors to success. I mean, if a seed takes too long, it just kind of runs out of energy and dies. So doing some of those things to speed it along. And I think one of the biggest advantages of using the paper towel step is you get enough root that you can orient your plant. So you can sort of point it in the right direction, and it doesn't have to like point itself in the right direction, which can take a day at that stage. I mean, they're just tiny little things.
When I do the paper towel method, I'll hang it in a bag on like in a cabinet, and I orient it so the seed is at the top of the paper towel and it has only room directly straight down to sprout. And so I used to do it on a plate, and they'd kind of curlicue all over the place and mix it with each other. Now I have like 5 seeds all the way across the top, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across, and then they just have 5 straight down tap roots. You could take tweezers and literally take your pinky or a pencil, poke something in the soil. You have a nice hole, drop it down so the head is basically just really at the top, and then you can kind of gently pack it around or even backfill it in. And
I try not to even take it off the paper towel. I use one little piece of paper towel per seed, so I can pick up the whole piece of paper towel that's got the seed in it and like carefully fold back the paper towel and like lower the seed tail first right into the hole without ever touching it, without ever touching anything other than my fingers touch the paper towel.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
But if you put like 50 paper seeds into one paper towel, you can't do that. You got to find some way to fish them out. So
I like just doing that and then watering it. And like, yes, success.
The last time
I know,
but
I mean,
we're all sharing. That's the thing. It's a panel. We all have different ways. So there's no one.
I'd like spend some time with my plants, but you like hand watering and stuff later on. I mean, I don't think that the seedling stage is extra investment. It's definitely the time of the grow where I check on my plants most frequently. I'll check on seeds and seedlings like every few hours, right? Later on, and they grow.
They're way more sensitive. They're way more likely to die. They're just not as resilient as even an early veg, like 2-week-old plant is 100 times more hardy than a 1 or 2 day old seedling. And so once it's established, like you can kind of take it a little easier and not have to, be hovering. But I agree that cannabis seeds are expensive. And so I've tried to, and now that I make them myself, I've also tried side by sides. It's just fun to do citizen science where I treated one with H2O2 at 3%, 5 milliliters into a 500 milliliter cup. It's a very low concentration, but even that small amount and dunking them in a cap of H2O2 before I dunk it into there was enough to increase my germination rate from like 85, 90% to near 100%, or even just 100% in many circumstances. And I used to use the seed cracker if they didn't pop, and I'd pop, or even sometimes before they would pop, I would seed crack everything. And then that gave me a really high germination. So I just like to know the tools in the tool belt and see how they work for myself. And then I can kind of see, like last time I just bought seed starter mix, filled up, X amount of pots, planted the seeds. I had pre-moistened the soil through bottom watering so that it had a nice even moisture through the whole entire thing. And, lo and behold, 100% germination. So it can, there's so many different ways to go about it. I will say that method I do feel like was slower, but I was comparing it to myself doing like a paper towel method or a pre-soak, where this time I was literally just taking a dry seed and putting it into a wet soil and then waiting. And it felt like, about a week before everything was like up, sprouted, and like 100% of them were up and sprouted and starting to grow past the cotyledon. And when you use the paper towel method, sometimes I've left them in there for like 72 hours, and
it's too long.
It's so long that when you plant it, it's like you can even plant it up and like smush it around there, and it'll just start growing because it's like a live plant at that point. And
100%. Oh, and they're growing. They're not pushing out through seeds. You end up with more helmet heads, but because it's actually the action of pushing up through the soil that kind of sheds off the helmet. But like I'll help my plants off with their little helmets if they need help off, and they're growing. The other side to that is it's a little bit more predictable. Like I know how big my plants are going to be generally, unless like I encounter some sort of problem with them, like on day 4, on day 5, on even on day 2 or whatever, sort of how long it's going to take. And other germination techniques, like sometimes it takes 5 days, sometimes takes 10 days, sometimes you don't know when to give up waiting for them to break the soil or whatever. So I like to know a little bit better because I'm on a pretty tight schedule too. Like I'm gonna usually flip my plants on day 30 from seed gets wet. So if a seed doesn't make it, or if it, I have to like launch a backup seed or something, I want to do that pretty quick. I don't have a whole lot of time to sort of sit around unless I'm going to have to really change the nature of my grow.
I agree with that. In cocoa, especially 30-day, anything longer than 30-day from seed, the plants get way too large for most tent growers, I would imagine. So it is really a timeline based thing. And when you're talking about maybe a week or more to even sprout above the soil, that is a pretty large percentage of unknown. And it could be 80%.
On day 7, I'll have full serrated leaves coming in. You know, plant's going to be you're going to see node 2 coming up, and node 1's going to be open. And yeah, if you just drop your seed, you know, half an inch underneath some peat and keep the peat moist, it might just be kind of poking up through the ground on that day. So there's definitely, you know, easing the seed's path to life. Also, this is something for older seeds or seeds that you're worried about germination or have a lower probability of germination. It's basically like seeds are alive, especially for older seeds. Seeds are alive and they're metabolizing their energy pretty much always. They're in a very, very low dormant state, so not much, but that's why seeds have a shelf life essentially, is because they'll burn through their reserves. So the older the seed are, sort of the more of its energy reserve it's going to have spent. So it's incumbent upon you to get those cotyledons and the first leaves open to get it photosynthesizing. And it's sort of a race to get those first leaves open because the seed has a limited amount of energy to do that. So in those situations, I definitely think it's worth sort of babying the seed along and going through the paper towel stage and other things, keeping the conditions well, because it can definitely save days off of that.
You get rewarded for the effort, I would say. And on top of the 3% H2O2 thing I didn't mention earlier, because it used to be my only method. And then a couple times, even after I washed them, I feel like they would get some weird molds or mildews in the early stages. So I've followed up now with my first watering. I'll give Micro Plus or some micro product, but it's 99% of the time it's Micro Plus. I try to, like, in my head, I'm like thinking like strip anything if there is bad stuff with the H2O2, or at least give a chance to fight it off, and then come back and follow it up with a good microbe that I'm going to be providing throughout the rest of the grow. So
it sounds like you're probably using pharmaceutical H2O2, right?
Actually, no, I'm using really low strength, like general 3%. Just whatever over the counter.
Yeah, so it's for like first aid.
Yeah, not the 30% or whatever.
So at that stage, it's going to be fine. I get this question sometimes, though. For germination, it's going to be fine because you're using such a tiny amount of it. But growers sometimes ask if they can include that in their nutrient solution. And the issue there is that pharmaceutical grade H2O2 uses heavy metal as stabilizers. Usually tin is used as the stabilizer, and they don't list it on the ingredients. They list like stabilizing agents, and then you'll have to do your own research and like what type of stabilizing agents are used in pharmaceutical grade H2O2, and you'll realize that it's usually a heavy metal like tin. So if you're using a lot of it, like to knock down your reservoir or something later on, you can develop sort of heavy metal problems, and you may fail testing.
That's a great note.
That's a really good point.
Had not heard of that or been made aware of it. Thankfully, I don't use it in that regards. But if you're a DWC,
I don't think you have any problem in germination stage, right? You're using that, and it's like.
But it's great because this show goes far and wide. I mean, literally internationally, and we've got a lot of people that listen to even the podcast after that are never in the chat live. So I appreciate that feedback. And then I also want to give Noah the Grow a chance to give some feedback on what do you like to do? Do you do anything like pre-soaking your seeds and anything, or just plain water? How do you go about getting them sprouted? You might be stuck on mute, Noah.
I'm sorry, what was that?
So do you do anything special when you're popping seeds, like pre-treat them with something like a microbe? I think Spartan mentioned there's like some people that do like hormones or kelp and things like that. And then there's also people that, like myself, use H2O2 or some other product to pre-treat the seed. Or some people just go straight into plain water. So I was curious if you have any methods with your seed that you like to employ.
No, just pretty much what everyone is talking about. If I do it, I usually just use the little cubes and just put it, that's basically, and get them wet. That's it. I haven't really done anything fancy. I've done, paper towel and all that, but nothing.
The cubes work so damn well. That's like they're real simple. I mean, it's hard to even like overwater with them because they, like, if you wring it out so it's just not, even if it's too damp, I think they'll probably still sprout because it'll just slowly lose some of that moisture and get the seed to go. But like I recommended and had recommended me soak them for like 5 minutes and then kind of do like a light squeeze just to make sure it's not like sopping wet, and then pop your seed in there and they're pretty much off to the races. As long as that seed is good to sprout, it's probably going to sprout in that root riot or rapid root or whatever puck. Even the Jiffy pellets, I think, are pretty successful a lot of
Jiffy
time. But
pucks. Yeah, that's a good tip. They're really relatively cheap and they work really good.
Yeah, I'd
Especially
use
if you're
those
going into
too.
peat. If you're going to go into peat anyway, might as well use a peat, you know.
and even going into
Water
cocoa, I
peat.
think Doc starts with the peat pucks as well, and then goes into cocoa, and it's successful both ways. So it's definitely
for sure. It's just easier on the little seedlings to be in peat, which can basically tolerate plain water and not create problems.
Brandon Rust, you're the only one who hasn't weighed in so far on this one. So do you do anything when you're popping seeds as far as treating them with like microbes or something else? Or just plain
Nah,
water?
I don't do anything unless I feel like I need to. If I've got some new healthy seeds that I know are gonna pop, I just usually toss them in water for 24 hours. Once they've cracked open, I stick them in soil. I do like to use like some micro plus once I water them, like into the soil, or some trichoderma with the Bacillus subtilis, just because that will aid in case there's too much moisture. Because I'm having, these nice humid, like hot environments when we're kind of popping these things, and that's ideal for microbial growth. And so having something that's going to be beneficial can help outcompete anything that could potentially cause that taproot to like dampen off and have that seedling die. So that's just one of the things after the fact that after they've already popped and I'm putting them in. The only time that I'll do like a seed wash is if I feel like I have like older seeds or like I don't know where the seeds look kind of dirty, like that. I could do a seed wash with hydrogen peroxide where I'll just put a small amount of hydrogen peroxide, usually like 1 cap full of hydrogen peroxide in like a little 16-liter or 16-ounce bottle of water, and I'll just shake up the seeds real good. And then before I'm doing my seed soak, and then really old seeds, there are things that you can do. I haven't like ever really had success trying it though. I've heard that like some seeds that I've had, I just haven't been able to get to pop. Some like 22-year-old plus seeds, and I've used things like amino acids. I've used microbe products. I've used gibberellic acid, but without any effect. So
The,
I
the
haven't.
best
I've
best
never
tip I'd
been
give
able.
for old is crack and GA3. Kyle Breeder, he
Crack.
was the one who got like I think like 25 to 50% of seeds from like the 80s and 90s using 50 to 150 parts per million. I wish I knew EC or something, but try a bunch of different ranges within that for using GA3. And he said that they weren't super stretchy. It just got him to go. Kagyu 1 from Coastal Seeds popped a 40-year-old seed with a seed cracker. It popped, the seed started to grow a taproot, but because he didn't use GA3, I don't think I had enough stored energy. Maybe its own GA3 that would naturally be in the seed, or whatever other
Yeah,
hormones the
that's what
plant naturally
happens is
has.
the stored energy is hormones like GA3. That's what you're doing. You're adding that gibberellic acid back into the plant.
And so that's I would say is the best bet. You want to crack it so that way, if it was fresher, I would say scarification works great. Getting water in there, that's also why I think dock seeds sprout really quick. If you shake it up with the, you know, whatever
Stuffing.
sandpaper or
I
like a
know
matchbox.
that none of my grapefruit times super silver haze will pop, and those I think are from '98.
Did they
I've
pop when you
tried. I
first
have
had them?
hundreds of the seeds. I have hundreds of them, and I've done every which way. I've seed cracked. I've done seed cracking, and then other stuff. I have gone like
Did
through
you
the
ever get
motion.
those to grow though? Like, did they grow when you
No,
first made them?
no. But here's the
Mhm.
thing: they weren't. I didn't make these ones. These were given to me. Somebody gave me a library from like '98. It had seeds in it from '98 to 2003.
My wonder would
Oh,
be if it was a sterile cross or if they got like really, really hot and just like nuked them. Just like one good time, it just nuked that batch.
You can
And-
definitely do things that screw up the seeds and then they're just dead. Absolutely like that. Microwave.
But it's not just that. It's like I've done the same thing with a bunch of subcool seeds from 2000 that I have. I still have a bunch of them, and I only cracked a couple of them. And
It's
tried
a
different things.
challenge. How do you store them? How have they been stored?
Well, I don't. These
Well,
came
he
to
doesn't
me-
know before
these
him,
came to
right?
me-
So
These came to me like a year ago, and they're from 2006. So I can't say how those were stored. Me personally, all of my seeds are just stored in my dark closet where it's just nice. It just stays nice and cool in there. It's like probably 68 degrees all the time.
those are
Yeah,
going to
it's
have like a
little bit
5-year
warm,
shelf
though.
life.
Seeds won't last as long at that temperature. If you want them to last longer, to put them in a refrigerator. down in
But here's the thing: I
40s.
have seeds that came from that exact same library from that exact same time period. No problem. They all pop. You know what I mean? So it's
Well,
just
there's absolutely variability in viability of seeds. So, and that can be related to the mother plant that they were growing on, and how healthy she was. That can also be related to, the genetics and the specific strains or whatever. So there's a lot of factors that can impact sort of seed variability or seed viability. And so that's not particularly surprising that like one batch of seeds did okay and another batch of seeds went through sort of the same storage situation and didn't do okay. If the storage situation across 20 years or whatever was challenging, some seeds are just going to run out of gas before the other ones would.
I think that
I
you-
understand that. I just personally have never had experience using, a biostimulant type product to like get something old to pop. I've just never been able to do it personally.
Yeah, I definitely wonder what makes it work for some people and not for others. And I think that Doc really hit the nail on the head with a couple of things, like the genetics, the health of the mother plant that it came from. I've noticed that from one breeder to another breeder, even if like I know I could watch them and video document the process of when they made the seeds, like how old they are. And I think the health of the plant really is a big thing, and so is genetics. So great points there, Doc. And we have another great question from Sky Overhead, who says, question for Synthanol. Is there a natural predator for harlequin bug, Mergantia histrionica?
Mergantia histrionica. It sounds like histrionica.
Alrighty. And then it is on my kale plants. Thanks.
Yeah, I would not use like a predator though. There might be some parasitic wasps that go after them. I don't know any off the top of my head, and it might not be a commercially available species. But actually, for that, I would use something like Beauveria bastiana. So they're pentantamids, so they're like stink bugs, kinda. And so, in my experience, a lot of that family is mild to moderately susceptible to like Beauveria and some other entomopathogenic fungi. So I wouldn't rely on a predator. I don't actually think I can't think of a commercial predator at the moment that would be, and also some places you might not have access to it, right? So there's also that. I don't know where this question is coming from, but usually you can get Beauveria or Isaria or some of the other entomopathogens. And they also like to cluster a lot. So there's another reason for that. So the nymphs don't have wings, but the adults do. And if you find some eggs on your kale, they're going to be like arranged usually in like a cluster, almost like a hexagonal cluster. Very pretty, actually. But you can just crush those if you want to be preventative. And if you do find some of these nymphs, yeah, they kind of look like little ladybugs to a lot of people, but they're not ladybugs. They're a totally different group. And they do like to kind of feed near each other. So I feel like you can really hit them with something like Beauveria, and you can get a lot of them at once. I also have they just posted the people who won at the Farmers Cup, if we want to delve into that.
Before we get to that, I have a related question to the question that you were just answering. And it makes me think a little bit, because they're talking about kale. I know something that's banned on cannabis is myclobutanol, which is known as like Eagle 20, because when it's inhaled through a smoking apparatus, it converts, I believe, to hydrogen cyanide, making it unsafe for consumption. However, this is a common product for food, like tomatoes and other cultivated products. So with that being in mind, is there, with the knowing that it's kale, not cannabis, would you be able to like go maybe harder with like a spray that, because you're not smoking it, you could maybe take out I know Bavaria, you gave us a great example, but if that's not available, or if something else that is like non-cannabis friendly, that's kale friendly is out there, I'm just curious if there's something like that.
I'm glad you asked, because I was answering the question very precisely based on the parameters. But you're right. You could totally use like a safe chemistry. I wouldn't use myclobutanil. Should probably start with that. Mostly because myclobutanil, although this is what you were saying, Jack, it's a fungicide, so it's not going to affect our particular problem. But yeah, you could use something like a pyrethrin product, would just, annihilate these guys, in my experience as well. And it, like I've said in other podcasts and here too, it's very fortunate because it will rapidly decay and it stops being what it is in the presence of light. So really, it's a pretty safe chemistry to use. It's from chrysanthemums. A lot of people are familiar with pyrethrin. I don't mean pyrethroids, and I definitely don't mean permethrin. I mean pyrethrin. The wording does matter. The terminology matters.
Maybe you could just type the proper one in the chat too after we have this little talk, so that the people who watch back can go. Because sometimes I hear something and I try and spell it myself on Google, and I end up down the wrong rabbit hole, so to speak. So it's definitely tough for some people.
Pyrethrin. There it is. So yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you could. I was thinking about it as I was saying this, so maybe you were on my wavelength there, Jack. But yeah, there are other things that you could totally, perhaps an azadirachtin or a neem product as well. That kind of a thing. Definitely.
Good considerations. And it's just something that I thought of because that's like the most notable one. I feel like a lot of people have that Eagle 20 kind of history ingrained in them because it was unfortunately sprayed by a lot of the people before we knew any better on cannabis. And that's really nasty stuff. So I'm glad that we do know better now, and we can advocate against that and advocate for better options that are out there, cleaner options, and still very effective ones. And so we can save a lot of people headaches and potentially poisoning themselves. So with that said, Weed Nerd DWC, another longtime listener and past member of the show, asks, I hear of precision stress, quote, techniques with fertigation. Are there any, and should we do them? I'm going to pass that to Dr. MJ.
I thought you were going to take that sort of yourself first. Specifically with fertigation, we've talked a lot about the University of Guelph study about the week 6 dryback. And I don't know if that's exactly what we're talking about in terms of precision stress, but I mean, that's where my mind goes to. And we were sort of selectively stressing the plants in very specific ways to get a beneficial result from it. There's some other things that I think growers do that end up stressing the plants in kind of unprecise ways, sometimes with the intent to sort of stimulate a better harvest. But I think that's the only one that I would even caution towards in terms of fertigation practices specifically.
Well, and yeah, they specified with fertigation because there are a lot of like other stress techniques I've seen in people, whether it's plant training or like drilling a nail through their stalk or some other
ice water.
dark before ice water flush. Yeah, there's a lot of different stresses that people try to implement.
Itself is, I guess, the other place that I would go to in thinking about that to the extent that the flush, when I'm talking about the flush at the end of the grow, right before you harvest your plants, if you do that sort of thing, to the extent that benefits the plants, it's not because it's getting rid of nutrients that the plants have already absorbed. I mean, we know that doesn't happen. So it may be stressful for the plants. And, a lot of growers really swear that it has a notable impact when they do it and when they don't do it. I'm tempted to think that may be a stress response that they're sort of picking up on in the plant, because being flushed is stressful to the plant. And there's other things that growers sort of swear by that last week before harvest, like the ice water thing, that you know, if any of those things do bear fruit, as it were, and theoretically, I think that the mechanism through which they're going to be shown to be beneficial will be by sort of precision stress. But at this point, it's not very precise because we don't know what we're doing.
It is totally, somebody said like bro science to the max. And I think that's a pretty good summary of it. The Guelph study, I will admit, I think was well done. I hope that people try and replicate it and look deeper into it. But I've read it several times. I've sent the article to people many times. And every time I read it, I'm still impressed. I'm like, they did this well. This is how I would do it. And with good scientists, they probably took even more considerations that I wouldn't have controlled for. So I'm really happy that they did it. Even with that knowledge, even with the personal experience firsthand, doing it many times, late flower, drought stressing. I'm currently late flower, and I'm like, every time my earth box goes dry, I am fighting. Like, I'm at the point where I have to drought stress it now, or else it's not going to happen before harvest. And because I've been doing everything so properly the rest of the time, I'm like, I know I need to drought stress it, but I still just want to like throw that water in there. So right now is actually the time where I'm not watering. Last week I said, oh, I'm going to drought stress it, but I didn't. I kept watering it. So a well-watered plant will still perform very well. So it's not like you absolutely have to do it. And every other precision stress technique I've seen quoted or paraphrased on the internet has absolutely no evidence. There's no Guelph study. There's even really side by side. They're just like, this is how I've done it. And I've always done it. And I like this way. So you should do it that way because I do it this way. And I know everything because I've been doing it for 100 years. And you should bow down to me because I'm an 18th generation master grower. So that's like a lot of the explanations that I get from people. Obviously, I'm being facetious and exaggerating a little bit there, but I hear that kind of talk.
And I group those things into two general categories: things that are almost certainly going to damage your harvest or your yield potential, or things that probably aren't going to have much of an impact on anything at all. There's not much of that stuff that I actually think does produce sort of notable improvements in the plants. I think the main thing all growers should focus on is keeping your plants happy and healthy and sort of well provided with everything that they need in the right doses and temperatures and all of that.
Which that I also take.
Yeah,
I have the approach that I don't like to really induce stress because there's things that you can, because like I think that to maximize the genetic potential, in my mind, what I'm thinking of is the plant's ability to upregulate its genetic expressions. If it's going through a lot of stress, it has to use energy to deal with that stress. So you can turn on certain like stress sequences using like biology, for instance, without necessarily having to cause any type of physiological damage or any type of actual physiological stress to the plant, to where it will inherently react, but it's reacting in a positive manner where it's upregulating a system instead of downregulating a system.
That's a great point. I want to give a second to welcome in who just joined us, the American One.
Hello, Jack, panel, everyone in chat. I am the American One on YouTube, and the American One _ Keens on the IG. I'm sorry I'm late, and I'm happy to be here. I hope everyone had a great week and getting ready for another one.
We're happy to have you. We just got a question about precision stress related to fertigation, and we talked about that for a while, but now we're talking about kind of the other stresses. And one thing that was brought up was kind of the flush and how that might be a stress event. And I'm sort of wondering if the flush, if it is a stress, a lot of people really, I know that there's bro science, but there's like a lot of people who really believe in that one. And I actually would say I probably fall in that camp. Like, I don't know if it's a stress related thing or what. Maybe I think a lot of people are overfeeding the entire time. So getting it down to like a more proper level might just be beneficial for the plant. But I'm also wondering if if we're going to call it a stress, the flush causes some sort of decay of an undesirable plant molecule or something like chlorophyll that's harsher to smoke. Like putting the plant through that stress maybe makes it do something to itself that.
You mean like how if you're hunting, like the meat can go very sour if it's like, in a certain kind of state before you execute it? That was a ghoulish way to put it. I didn't mean it like that, but you know what I'm trying to
But no,
say.
that does happen. That's why they try to make
Yeah.
cattle
It's
before they
spoiled
get
meat.
slaughtered not experience a lot of like fear. They want to make it as clean and whatever as
Because
possible.
the stress hormones produced by an animal will cause that hormone it
Yeah.
works itself into the actual muscle. It's a signaling response to fight.
It's like, I got to get out of here. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I will say this, I don't think it's actually how plants work. How I like to talk, well, with regards to the stress, like, because plants rely on that signaling system, there is no situation where they're not constantly managing growth and defense, right? And there is a trade-off, like I always talk about. So if you're inducing a stress response, you're telling the plant that it needs to stop doing as much of this kind of certain kinds of growth. I'm very much simplifying it, right? Because there's different kinds of signals, different kinds of stimuli. But basically, you can't grow thick and stout and simultaneously, quick and long.
Right. And
It's
like
not
Brandon
gonna
said, there's only
happen.
so much energy, and the energy is going to have to be reallocated to either repairing damage, fighting off the pest or stressor, whether it's drought or otherwise. The plant's going to have to dedicate energy to mitigating that stress versus just growing and, respiring and doing all the other things that it wants to do. So I think as little as often.
Growers, we're not trying to violate the laws of physics necessarily. I think what growers are trying to do is just basically send the signal to the plant on the last few days, even like, okay, listen, plant, at this point, put all of your energy into, cannabinoids, and that's it. Right. Like, don't worry about anything else, like, and trying to just poke it with the right stick so that you get that kind of response from it. But you're gonna compromise other things potentially. And like with the flush, particularly, like, I think if you do, regardless of media, if you do a flush long enough that you're actually sort of lowering your plant's ability to complete photosynthesis, like it's starved of nutrients, then I think you're going to have an adverse effect on your overall harvest size. So if you flush for like a couple of weeks or even a week, I think that you could seriously deprive your plant and end up with a smaller, and probably immeasurably smaller if we did a good controlled experiment on that.
And you know what, I feel like most of the things that we're looking for when it comes to the benefits of the plant, or like when we're talking about maximizing things, we're usually talking about maximizing the cannabinoid and terpene profiles and also maximizing the yields. And I think that all of those can really be addressed through proper nutrition, because if we're looking at like over fertilization of nitrogen, for instance, that has a huge impact on cannabinoid and terpene production. So you'll get a lower quality product if you've overfed nitrogen through your whole cycle, for instance, or you have yield suffer if you haven't given it enough potassium. So a lot of the things are simply, things like calcium to nitrogen ratios, like how the plant's going to actually grow, and the availability of those nutrients.
Yeah, like, it's just going to take those up and it's going to use those. And it sounds like it's like it's a semi-automatic system. There's those triggers and stimuli, but like those get into the system and then they get manipulated by that system and then they get used in various ways, right? So definitely I agree with that. And I also don't want to diminish the point that Brandon made earlier, which is that, you can stimulate, or at least, don't let me put words to your mouth, but I think what you're trying to say is, or one thing that you were mentioning was that, you're trying to have these stress response without like the damage, obviously, without actually damaging the plant, like physically, right? Like, instead of having to have the herbivory happen, you can have a stimulus that affects that, so that makes sense. Oh, I see Spartan is the host now. So does that mean that Jack is not here anymore? It does.
I'm having a Jack.
I get a host.
He desynced.
That's a terrible idea.
Oh no. Yeah, you got automatically promoted. Zoom looked around the room and said, who should be host now that Jack's not here? And like,
exactly.
Yeah, I think one of the
signal.
examples that you could say, instead of having something actually physically chewing on your plant, but then using something like chitin or chitinase as a biostimulant that would actually elicit the same genetic reaction without actually having the plant to expend that additional energy.
Exactly, right. And like, although you will still get a reactionary trade-off that might affect growth and things like that, you know, you're not going to have leaves bitten off, right? And so, yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And it's kind of like the concept of a dirty drug, right? So like, you know, some medications will affect multiple things and other medications will affect in a more precise or narrow way. And I don't think that's always like for certain stimuli. I'm certainly not the be all end all of this knowledge. I don't think we really have all that information, particularly for cannabis, but you know, it's one of those things where some stimuli that we apply might be better than others. And I think that is kind of at a certain point, I think that's where it's kind of coming and boiling down to is like, you know, you could have a certain effect happen in a bunch of different ways, but you might prefer one that's more precise, and you might prefer one where maybe you affect 3 things at once or something like that. Oh, Jack is the host now. He's back. Good.
The thing with flushing, I always have said, is it just kind of depends on what you're doing and it depends on your own grow. I always recommend growers that I talk to do your own thing. I know guys that grow in like ocean forests, fox farms, different soils like that, and they use bottled nutrients. And I did that for years, and I'll tell you that I've done many grow science, whatever you want to call it, side by sides, where I had one light, exact same clones, one light, exact same clones, and I flushed one for 2 weeks with water only at the end, and another one, and the weed tasted not better, considerably better. So I recommend most people to do their own research and find what works for them.
Was there a yield difference?
What's that?
Is there a notable yield difference between the 2 lights?
You know, not really. And I've had that, I've done it. So I've done it a lot of times. So it can go back and forth. Like, you know, this plant's closer to the AC, this plant's not.
There's a lot of variables. Exactly.
There's variables in it, but no, 99% of the time.
And you were growing in a peat-based media using liquid news.
Yep.
Yeah. See, I'm still tempted to say that the only way I could imagine that benefiting the plants is through stress. And for 2 weeks seems like a long time to be stressing the plants at the end. But
I'm telling you that the weed 99%
I hear you.
of the time tastes better.
I'm with Noah too, man. When I grow salts, I always flush.
Do you guys ever see weed spark?
It's
Have you ever
better.
seen that when you're smoking a joint? It's sparking and shit?
I've seen it happen a few times, a select
What
few
is that?
times.
To
Yeah.
the extent
What is
that you
causing
have
that?
that much phosphorus embedded in sort of the flowers of your plant, you're not going to get rid of it by feeding it plain water for the rest of your life. You could feed
It's
that
true.
plant plain water.
And
The phosphorus
Dr.
is not
Coco,
getting out
I
of
agree
the
with that,
plant.
but I was just asking more on like a related,
Right.
because that's the opposite end of the spectrum. One, you're giving too much
Yeah.
and obviously doing
Yeah.
a lot of things wrong.
Right,
But
but
we've
it's
all come
there.
across that harsh black coal that you could smoke as hard as you want and it's not going to turn white, and it is so harsh and it makes you fucking want to cough up a lung. And then we've also had that really light, fluffy, powdery ash that is like nice and pleasant to smoke. And I don't think the
that's
ash
more
color
about the water
necessarily.
percentage.
Yo,
See,
no,
this
listen
is-
to
this-
me.
this
Hold
is
on.
my-
Let me talk a second. 'cause
Okay.
I know for fact because I've been there. I've done it. So if you over fertilize cannabis plant with salt nutrient, it will get that black charcoal freaking garbage, man. I know it. So I think
You're not going to get rid of that with flushing.
Right.
well,
Yeah, but
Maybe
you're
maybe
giving-
it would be a
no,
little
hold
bit
on
less
now.
bad. Is the
See,
people's
that-
You're
thought.
giving your
That's
plants,
right.
if you're flushing for 2 weeks, you're giving your plants like 20% less fertilizer. And at the end of the cycle, when the buds are being formed, it's to me,
Well, it's less for
Hey.
input, right?
20%
Yeah,
less.
listen to me, hold on, because the nutrients that I was using, unbeknownst to me, wanted me to flush every 2 weeks or whatever, give it a water rinse through.
Those
So-
aren't good nutrients, right?
So that's one thing. Second thing, yeah, I don't know. People say that the water content in the bud will stop it from going to white ash. Dude, you got a torch on the thing and it still isn't turned to white ash. You're definitely burning all the moisture out of it. What do you mean if there's moisture in it, it won't go to white ash?
I think that sometimes
Explain
people
that to
smoke
me,
stuff
guys.
that's
That's an
a little
interesting
bit.
point. Yeah.
So
what are
I
you
think
guys
there's
talking
two
about with this
cases
big
there.
water?
There's the
I've
damp
seen it,
bud
so-
versus the dry bud, and then there's also the over fertilized bud versus the properly
Listen,
fertilized bud.
Yeah.
I know
So-
over fertilized makes it black charcoal and it doesn't burn.
But that's not
And
even
it
the real
spikes
point here
it.
about flushing, Cal, is that flushing's not going to fix that. It's not going to remove
Right.
those phosphates or those nitrates or, out of the flowers once they've already been deposited there. It's just not.
Right.
Now, why is- but why
Nothing
is
comes
that?
out
I
of the
think-
plant. When we feed it plain
Yeah.
water, it's like
I
nothing's
believe that.
coming out of the plant.
So
I
the
think
most
there's a
important thing is
fundamental
to not
point here.
over fertilize. But let me ask you this: how about with the flush in between? Like, so the soil doesn't build up.
That's to
must have
break
something to do with the
lockouts.
soil.
No, that's really to break lockouts because they have an unbalanced mix. Most of the time, the manufacturer tells you to flush every week or every couple of weeks. It's because
sort of
things are
just build
becoming
up.
unstable in that sort of
what
media.
happens is oftentimes in lower pHs, that phosphorus, when it's liberated into the phosphate anion, it'll attach to things like iron, aluminum, manganese, and then in higher pHs, it'll actually bond and turn into calcium phosphate. And so what happens is neither of those are available, and they require biological cycling to liberate those two different cation and anion from each other. And so they just stay in solution and they cause your EC to go up. So they have an electrical charge, but they're unavailable. So that's the stress factor that you'd be seeing in these types of systems.
Well, so yeah, that's what the thing I don't understand. The people say it's due because it's the bud wasn't dry. Like when you hit it with that torch,
Yeah, I don't know
you're
about
taking
that
out
one.
all the
I
moisture.
actually have some
It's
insight
beautiful.
on this topic, and there's even a research
enlighten
paper.
us.
It's from 1923. What happens is
Wow.
what happens is plants will actually take up carbonate, which is an anion. And they do this because they need to balance their sap charge. So if you're looking at the major things that the plant is taking up, the major elements, they have a positive charge associated with them. Calcium, magnesium, potassium. And so what happens is the plant will use things like silica. It'll use carbonate to balance out that internal charge. And so if you have something that's really unbalanced, you don't have enough, they're going to take up more and more of that carbonate. Now that carbonate actually stays in the plant material itself. And so they did a bunch of ash tests in this research paper from 1923, and they're looking at different fertilizers and the concentrations of carbonate that the plant takes up under different regimens. And they see that with higher imbalances of those minerals, then they'll take up more carbonate, which is carbon compound. And obviously carbon is black when it's,
This is tobacco.
no, this was done on I think it was done on Arabidopsis, if I'm not mistaken, but it's a really old paper, and I was
Right.
looking into, plant root uptake of different carbon compounds. And that's one of the things I had come across. And it got me thinking because they're actually doing ash tests in these research studies. And so one of the things that really just stuck out was you could be having this carbonate uptake because things aren't so balanced out. Maybe you don't have the proper nutrition, or maybe
Like with a
simply
shitty
because of
nutrient
the
line.
nutrition that you're using. Yeah. And then that causes that. And also those elements in abundance to access nitrates, excess sulfates, and there was some other stuff. I'll have to dig out that thing. I've got it at my office
I'll just say, related to cannabis, I mean, specifically, we know there's nutrient lines that only give you so much. If you get like the AB bottle, they want you to buy the rest of it. So they're not giving you a full solution. And then they're also recommending you give way too much fertilizer.
Well, they
and
can't give you a full solution. And the reason is because these chemicals that they use, they don't actually play well together. So they can't put the same thing in the same bottle. So if you were to look at something like calcium nitrate, right? You're not going to put calcium nitrate with DAP, with monoammonium phosphate, right? Because what happens is that phosphate, once it's liberated, it bonds to the calcium ion. And so there's those types of interactions will always happen because none of those elements are chelated. Like they're not able to like stay separate molecules, and they're so highly reactive. That's why you have so many different bottles. It's not because they couldn't put it. They can't physically put all those things in the same bottle because of the reactions that'll happen.
Some lines are worse than others. I'll throw out advanced nutrients is just shitty for having like 37 bottles in their line, and they break it down overly so that you have to buy multiple things when they could shrink down several of them into
They
mixed things.
also try to convince you need to buy a bunch of stuff that you don't need to buy. I mean,
Yes.
let's just be honest about that side of it too.
Just the upselling, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
There-
I mean, inventing products so that people can have something else to buy. I mean,
And
it really,
honestly,
like,
if you're looking at advance and I'll throw my 2 cents in because I'm not a fan at all. Most of it's just water. If you look at their base, you'll have
Yeah.
something like diammonium phosphate, magnesium sulfate, and potassium sulfate. You can buy all of that stuff. DAP is probably like $15 for a 50-pound bag. And the amount that they have in there is probably a teaspoon, right? And of each of those elements, Epsom salt's even cheaper than that. Potassium sulfate's a little more expensive, but it's not that expensive at all as a base ingredient. And so you're like the amount of profit as a percentage that they're making off of you is probably somewhere in like the
Thousands.
it's
1,000%
beyond that.
up, yeah.
It's beyond that. It's tens
Yeah, it
of
is,
thousands of
probably.
a percent, dude. It's pharmaceutical type. Maybe not all the way up to pharmaceuticals, but it's huge, dude. It's huge. I'm telling you.
Well, when the biggest ingredient is dihydrogen monoxide, it's like, yeah, I mean, obviously, I totally agree with that point. And I also wanted to just, first of all, we have a bunch of questions we should get through. Not
Yeah,
to be
I was
the
about to say, I'm
moderator
gonna jump to
here. I just want to say this. I just want to go back to what we were saying with the phosphorus and everything, because I think, like, it's just really important to know that, like, some of these, let's just go back. Some of these nutrients, they're mobile. Some of these nutrients, they're not mobile. And I think, like, that was the point I was trying to sort of get out of Dr. Coco, because I think that was like the major, like, you can't really
You can
argue
flush all you
with
want.
that.
It's not going anywhere.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you can't really do anything with that. So without further ado, let's get
plants
into
also
the other-
the mobile nutrients, they'll move them around when they're called on someplace else in
Yeah.
the plant. They're not going to move them around because, like, oh, I'm getting flushed. It's like
More
the
water,
garbage day.
yeah.
Here's some garbage I can throw out. I mean, that's not how this shit works. So.
That's not how.
You know what?
How do you think that works in nature?
What makes it even more complex is that there's 3 different ways that nutrients are uptaken by plants, and they're like phosphorus, for instance, that is only pretty much taken up through diffusion. It's not taken up through root inception or mass flow. So it's like you have to think about things like that when you're looking at these elements as well. We're not just looking at the availability, the form they're in, but also the way they're taken up. If you look at something like copper, I think copper is pretty much only available through root inception, which means that the plant has to basically mine it.
Good points. But Brandon, we have a question. I think this would go pretty specifically to you. Intuitivewit says, at Cheap Home Grow, what is the kill rate for Quillaja on mites and aphids?
Ooh, I have a
Okay.
paper for that.
Okay, so Matthew, actually.
I've
Brandon
never
first.
I've never claimed or used any of the product that I have as a insect pest management or for like a fungal suppression, although I know that there's been research on that been done. I use the Quillaja that I have that's cold pressed. It has more saponins, it has more bioactive compounds than the dry stuff, but I really just use it for a surfactant. It's a surfactant that has that benefit, and what that does is it just helps with even movement of water through that, and it also helps with the diffusion of nutrients into the water a lot easier too, since the surface tension of that water is far less.
Thank you, Brandon. And Matthew, did you have a paper on that one?
Yes, sir. Let me share the screen.
Cool stuff.
Well, this is great.
Thank you.
Hopefully that people can see this and they can get the Quillaja for insect pest management and for all the other wonderful things that it has with it.
I know
Can
soap
you,
nuts are pretty good for IPM as well, and they're a saponin or saponin effect.
Yeah.
Can you enable it?
Oh yeah, sorry. Typically, I think it might even be because I got dropped. Okay, multiple participants can share simultaneously. I think you should be able to share the screen now.
Like,
Nice,
because the
okay.
update jack always puts everything in default.
Oh,
Real quick,
that is
on the
what it is. They
last-
updated it, and all my settings
Yeah.
went back to the default. Thank you.
Yeah, that's
Spartan.
what happened.
Real quick on the last subject, Spartan, if you were using a peat-based soil and you were using a 100% organic bottled nutrient, in that scenario, would you think that you would flush the last week or two for flavor?
For flavor.
I wouldn't I don't know if you'd want to call it a flush, but I wouldn't feed.
Right,
last couple
exactly.
weeks.
Flush, rinse, water only. Any of
Yeah.
yeah, and I would. And so anybody who's listening, that's my personal view. I know other people on the panel have their own view, but
Oh,
I had
yeah.
to throw it out there.
Yeah,
Yo,
dude. You don't want to fertilize at the end of a harvest. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
I
not
wanna-
done in any type of agriculture. People are applying starter fertilizers and then getting it through its cycle and then letting it kind of senesce and let those levels naturally, degrade.
When
Well,
you add
I'm-
bio-nutes, there's a lot of nutrient in that media. Even Rockwell, I think, holds quite a bit. When they do the PPM test, when they're flushing it through, there's a lot of stuff in there at the end. So I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people say.
I think
Oh,
we'll
it's
learn
gonna
more in
be
the
black
future,
and
but
white.
I don't want to
Yeah.
drag the flush topic on
Right.
because we've talked about it many, many times in the past, and I think we all have pretty
Yeah,
strong
sorry,
opinions,
keep it
but
that
not a lot
off.
of
we do.
But
stuff
I'm with
to-
Noah. I think
think
if
we
you add
all
liquid
flush at the
nutrient,
end,
you
though,
should
too,
flush
so-
it. Yeah.
yeah.
I don't flush, but I use water.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what I do too.
Yeah.
I'm about to
Well,
But I
flush
don't
this
flush. I
topic.
never
Pretty much.
flush anything because I'm monitoring
Flushing this
my
topic. Yeah,
levels.
let's talk about the kill rate of the quijalla because that was the question at hand.
So I actually didn't look through this paper, so we're gonna learn together here. It says triterpene saponins of quijalla, saponaria, Quillaja saponaria show strong aphidicidal, so aphid killing, and deterrent activity against the P aphid, Cyrthrosipon pisum. I'm gonna go to the results part of the abstract.
That 10
I love it
times
when
fast.
I know, seriously. So they have a background here, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm just going to hear the results and conclusion. It says here that when aphids were exposed to supplemented artificial diet for 3 days, a strong aphidicidal activity was recorded for 3 of the 4 saponins with an LC50, which means lethal concentration 50, so 50% death, of about 0.55 mg per milliliter for saponaria saponins, 0.62 mg per milliliter for acin, and 0.45 milligrams per milliliter for digitonin. I don't know what LT50 is off the top of my head. Do you, Dr. Coco?
So you can sorry.
I'd imagine lethal
It's okay.
something.
Lethal
Lethal
something.
something, yeah.
Lethal something values range between 1 and 4 days depending on the dose. For diosgenin, only low toxicity, about 14%, was scored for concentrations up to 5 mg per milliliter. In choice experiments with treated diet, a deterrence index of 0.97, which we can go and see a graph about, was scored for saponaria saponins at 1 mg per milliliter. In contrast, direct contact showed no repellent effect. I'm going to say that again. Direct contact showed no repellent effect. Spraying of fababine plants with Q saponaria saponins resulted in a lethal concentration of 50% dead of 8.2 mg per milliliter. Finally, histological, so tissue analysis in aphids fed with quijalla saponaria saponins demonstrated strong aberrations of the aphid gut epithelium, and exposure of midgut cell lines to saponaria saponins in vitro confirmed their cytotoxic or cell toxic effect. So the conclusion is, the present insect experiment provides strong evidence that saponins, as tested here with the triterpene saponins, can be useful as natural aphicides and deterrents. Furthermore, the insect midgut epithelium is suggested to be a primary target of saponin activity. So there you go. The answer to your question is yes.
Good
I think they
education.
want to know the
LT50
ratios.
is lethal
So if
time.
we're looking
Lethal
We're
time,
looking
okay.
at those ratios, what'll be the conversion?
For what?
What is it? Oh, 0.55
They're giving
milligrams
milligrams per liter.
milliliter.
So you could just figure out, the conversion of that to gallon if you're in the US.
Yep.
Yeah. And we have a little graph here. This is a log graph. So mortality goes up as concentration goes up. That makes sense.
Sweet.
I'm being facetious here, but
Here, look
yeah.
at I actually have some Quillaja. I'm gonna try that because I've never actually used it. I use it as a surfactant, but I haven't tried it as a standalone pesticide or as a deterrent. And I have
Matthew, have we only seen this against aphids? Have we seen any of this research against any other insect?
The question originally was mites and aphids.
Right.
I would expect it to have a similar effect because the physiology might be similar enough. There are also, but the paper makes a good point that there's all kinds of saponins that are associated with this plant. So, like it really depends on which ones you're talking about. Kind of like with neem, right? There's azadirachtin and there's a bunch of other stuff. And so those aren't really synonymous, but yeah, it's kind of the same sort of thing. And yeah, I would expect it to have bad effect if it's attacking the gut lining. Well, that can be a pretty conserved system. Not totally the same in all insects, but certainly that's going to ruin their day. Also, I always
like
mention
doing that.
this. Yeah, the saponins, like these saponins, there is an aquaculture toxicity to be discussed, I suppose. I think whenever this topic comes up, I mention it. So I'll mention it here. It's not good for fish, and it's certainly not good for a lot of aquatic arthropods that are important for the ecosystem. And this particular question comes on the heels of me reading a research report that talked about, again, like we have done for the last 2, 3, 4 decades, that the insect mass on Earth, it's going down. Diversity is going down. It's not great. So many systems rely on insects for food, for cycling nutrients, for all kinds of stuff, even the ones that eat the plants.
Is this just as a result of broad use of pesticides across all ag?
There are several things. I think I think I remember the biggest factors being, one of the biggest ones is, of course, various aspects of modern agriculture. There's pesticide use, specifically pesticides that are, more broad spectrum, and they have a longer residual time and that sort of a thing. The laws of the USA are not the laws of other parts of the world, and they have different sort of rules and regulations. And even if they do have those rules and regulations, they don't necessarily have the the capability of controlling that, I suppose, if you want to put it that way. The other thing is that deforestation is a huge problem, and just destroying the natural environments that these organisms live in. It doesn't matter how much pesticide we don't use if they have nowhere to be. So
it's such a large proportion of like the net primary product of the planet, which is like all the energy that plants are able to harness from the solar flow of energy every day. Like so much of that now is agriculture. It used to be forests and wetlands and prairies and all sorts of things, and it's basically agriculture now, and that's just a few crops under pretty heavy insect management. So it's a scary world we're living in.
It makes me absolutely sardonic, and I hope we survive it.
The other thing
as a species, as a community.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, you first.
The other thing this study sort of reminds me of is the history of SM90. So SM90 used to be a really popular product amongst cannabis growers, both as a foliar spray and as a root drench application. It's a surfactant. And they got in trouble, and it has saponins. They got in trouble for selling it or for advertising its insecticidal properties. And since it wasn't labeled as a pesticide and hadn't gone through pesticide testing, they were marketing its insecticidal properties, and that's what led to the product getting pulled from the market in 2019, I believe. So it's like the same sort of history, like, oh, look, these products that we use because they're excellent surfactants also turns out have insecticidal properties towards sort of insects that we're not interested in. And so we're going to find a new sort of market for our product that way. But you got to make sure that if you're, and this is just legal BS, frankly, because the product didn't change, but pesticides are much more heavily regulated than other agricultural inputs. So you can sell something as a surfactant pretty easily. If you start selling it as a pesticide, you have to do much more rigorous testing.
Yeah, and even the paper mentions, I highlighted it for those who are viewing this video, but yeah, I highlighted that this paper mentions that, despite the results that they had, it's not totally conclusive. In fact, in some ways, we don't even know all of the different ways that it has this harmful effect. And, it bothers me quite a bit that people have this sort of naturalistic fetish where in which they're like, oh, man-made synthesized pesticide where we don't know all the effects, that is bad and evil. Natural product that we're going to be using, a natural derivative, we still don't know all the total effects, no problem.
Right.
I think that's a little
also-
hypocritical. So
Well, I
We've
think
got a
one
question from.
important-
Go ahead.
I'll say one last thing, Matthew. Maybe I misunderstood it, but important thing that I got from that was spraying it on the insect itself wouldn't do a damn thing. You would have to actually ingest it.
yeah.
Yeah, I read
that's
that.
a good point.
I thought I heard that too. It said direct contact is not the killer. They have to eat it to make it.
Yeah.
It has to go into the digestive tract, and it essentially it seems almost like it like suffocates them or something, or just ruins their insides.
Which is, their epithelium, their gut lining. It gives them a real bad case of diverticulitis, I guess. This is actually noteworthy because aphids and also mites, spider mites, for example, they, aphids feed on phloem. Actually, we have a question about phloem and xylem.
I was just about to introduce that one.
Yeah, so
all comes together.
This implies that the aphids are somehow reaching it in the phloem, which would also imply that the saponins are somehow getting into the phloem, or maybe somewhere along that line. So I don't really know. I didn't read the whole paper, so I don't really want to comment too much. But that's interesting. That's an interesting point to make. And yeah, so you want me to answer that question, phloem and xylem?
Yeah, so you can go ahead and introduce. I just want to shout out Smotpoker, who asked the question about xylem and phloem, longtime listener and also a past guest panelist on the show. So cheers, Smotpoker and Crispy Wannabe. I know you're out there listening.
And should we get the whole question?
Yeah, no, I thought you wanted to introduce it, so I was just going to let you.
Oh, sorry. Let me find it.
Oh, I can read it, and then you can take it.
A phloem, xylem, and does it intertwine with active passive transport?
So the difference between phloem and xylem, and anyone who knows better than I is free to say so, but basically phloem is like they're both like the circulatory system of the plant, right? And so xylem is the water channels. I often say the xylem water channels just to make sure people realize that. And it's not very nutritionally dense. It's mostly water and some trace minerals and anything else anyone wants to mention. But phloem is like
it's uptake. So
an uptake,
for growers, the xylem is like from the roots up to the plant. So water uptake, nutrient uptake, things traveling up to the plant and the site of photosynthesis, and then
it mostly goes one direction.
I agree that it's not very nutritious, but I just worry that when we say that, because the phloem is what has really the nutrients, that's the photosynthate, it has all the carbohydrates and everything else that the plant sort of produces, and that it's going down. So like if what you think of as like sap or something, like the good stuff in the plant that it's distributed.
I was referring to xylem, but yes, exactly.
It's the phloem. Right.
Yeah, but I was talking
about
xylem.
That's the good stuff. But you see, growers often, when you say that it doesn't have any nutrition, I'm just
talking about xylem.
Yes.
I was talking about xylem, not phloem.
Yes, I know. And you say that it doesn't have any nutrition, but that the nutrients, the growers themselves get confused about that. The nutrients like the NPK that we're providing to the plants and the roots are uptaken. So semantically, you're spot on. I'm just worried about that confusion, Matthew, if that makes sense now.
Yeah, definitely. So the phloem is where all the good stuff goes from the source to the sink, like you're saying, fruits and shoots, or roots, I should say. And yeah, I don't think I have much more to say about that. But yeah, like a lot of insects that focus on phloem, your aphids and those sorts of things, they're mostly feeding on the phloem and maybe a little teensy bit on the xylem if they need to dilute and most of it's sugar. And if anyone wants to argue with that, they can check out my videos on bricks and insect digestion. Apparently I have a reputation for this, but yeah, you check that stuff out on my YouTube channel, because 95% plus of it is those photosynthates, and that's usually sucrose. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
A specific question and follow-up was We Nerd DWC says, this is in reference to clone done upside down. Is that reversible? So like, does the xylem and phloem, can it flow both directions? And I'm assuming because we saw that clone did root. I think it was Seed Person One or somebody else, or maybe it was, I can't remember who did the upside down clone, but it's got roots. At least one of them, the one that was in the Johnny. Shout out to Johnny Caniseed, the sand tech, that cloning technique where they just go straight into sand. They got roots on that one the fastest. So, in my past experience, I've heard about the creeper plants that kind of have those long legs that go across the ground, and even on top of the earth, they'll start growing roots out of the sides if they're close enough to a damp soil. So, I don't know if that answers about xylem or phloem, but it definitely makes sense to me that a plant can root if the lower branches or even a cut is taken, flipped upside down and stuck into dirt. The plant is just, when it's put into dirt, it's like, hey, it's time to root. And
Yeah,
that's
it's like where
the environment it wants to root in.
air layering comes from and all that. Same kind of idea.
Yeah, you're replicating that environment, even though it's not in the soil. You're wrapping it with soil or like rapid ride cube or whatever it is. That's a really cool technique. I haven't done it. I really want to try it because it looks so cool and convenient, but I haven't actually implemented that one yet myself. So Keystone Cops asks, Zentanol, I'm going to root new mother plants soon, but wondering about best practices in the meantime.
Generally speaking, I like to make a sort of a bio barrier. I've talked about it in the podcast in the past. So basically, kind of like we talked about in the beginning, you don't have to do this, but like Jack does, you can go one of two directions. You can try to be mostly sterile, but then you really then all that responsibility is on you. And that can work out well for some people. Or you like do some sterilization to get rid of any nasties or baddies that might be there, microbially speaking. And then, inundate with various microbes that will have some sort of symbiotic relationship with the plant. Maybe they help the plant. Maybe they, feed it with some plant hormone analogs, that make it grow in a certain way. Maybe like gibberellic acid, like we mentioned earlier, other kinds of plant hormones, certainly not the only one. Perhaps it helps mine for nutrients. Perhaps it creates a heartig net, like certain mycorrhizae do, and has a physical, but also other sorts of barriers and buffers that keep the plant from having drought stress in the medium or being attacked directly. That kind of a thing. So that's sort of my suggestion.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that question before we go on? Because we do have a few more and getting low on time. We've got about half an hour left in the show. So with no objections there, I think we can keep going. 710 DP0 says, why does a plant know to stop eating in a bed or with organics? But when salts, what does it not know it's done? The wording on the last one was a little interesting. I'll just say from the organic perspective, the difference is the way that nutrients are being uptaken versus like a chelated nutrient where it's immediately available to the plant when you pour it in with the water. When there's an organic soil, the plant is typically using exudates to send signals into the soil, and those exudates say, I need, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, whatever it is, and the microbes work with the plant. It's sort of like a symbiosis that's happening, and the plant goes and those exudates sort of help send signals in the soil to what needs to be broken down and made available for the plant. And so it's never really ideally going to ask for more than it needs. But that being said, I think you should still try and make an ideal soil mix, because if you just throw like way too much of one particular nutrient in there, then you want to have balance even in organics. But I'll pass it over to Dr. MJ and let him explain a little bit more about the why the immediate availability is there with using something like a synthetic nutrient.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, the difference is, in the organic style, like you're describing, the plant has to ask for it and sort of work for it, what it needs. And that's one of the sort of energy advantages of hydroponic growing, is that we're giving the plants very easy to absorb nutrients, but they will kind of get, to some extent, what we give them. That's not always true. And there's other things that sort of start to go bad when we just indiscriminately give them nutrients, right? Like, it's not just that they're absorbing too many nutrients. It may be that the EC is too high, they're struggling to get water, they're getting, uptake issues at different ECs, like calcium is really hard for plants to uptake if the water's too salty. So things like that can start to come undone and come out of balance. But yeah, the biggest difference is we're like almost just laying it out on a buffet to the plant, instead of it having to go and work for each meal it gets or whatever, each dose of nutrients it gets. It's just sort of like able to feast in a hydroponic setup.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that question, or do we want to move on from there?
Well, I was just going to say, it's like, I don't know if this is the right word, osmosis. When the water is full of nutrients and the plant takes up the water, that's where the nutrients are in the water. So they're going in, you know what I mean? Isn't that the way it's working?
There's like three ways, like Brandon was talking about, like the nutrient uptake.
But I mean, specifically with water enriched nutrient water,
What? Say it again.
Just the water, the plant's taking up water, the nutrients are in the water, so it's forcing to take up the nutrients with the water.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
It's a really common misconception.
Well, I'm glad
the water
asked
comes across primarily through diffusion, through osmosis, which, just like the osmosis, like an RO system or whatever, purifies the water. The water that enters the plant through osmosis is pure water. All of the salts are left behind. The salts enter the plant separately through diffusion or different transport processes. Brandon's talking about mass flow or inception, or just active or passive transport, but that's separate than osmosis, which is where the vast majority of the water comes through. Now, there has to be water coming through osmosis in order for there to be water in the xylem, like Matthew is talking about, to transport those nutrients that enter to the plant, sort of to supply the plant with the raw materials that it's or the vitamins and water, basically, that it's going to use in photosynthesis. But those nutrients come in not through osmosis with the water. And I think that's what people assume, is like the plant takes its water like a straw. This is one of the reasons we have to measure EC, because the plant takes up water often faster than it takes up the nutrients, and that leaves sort of more nutrients behind, and that causes the water that's left behind to have a higher EC. And that's what we kind of monitor and balance in that. It would be a little
It's a constant fight. I think most people, if they're not really dialed in, they're fighting to not go high on the EC if they're giving synthetic nutrient every single feed, because the plant likes to take up water. It seems more than it likes to take up the nutrients that are given in certain ratios that might be a little bit higher. If it's proper and optimal, it seems like they might go in like in dock setup where they're auto watering 5 times a day and it's given 1.5 every single time. It might come out 1.6 every single time. As long as everything's dialed in, there's not going to be a whole lot of change. The plant likes that consistency. But when it starts to, you give it water once a day and it takes up that water, and then a whole bunch of the salts that they haven't broken down are left behind, and then you go in again once a day, and that EC just bumps up, like, from 1.5 to 1.7 to 2 and 2.2, and just keeps creeping up. And if you're not measuring the outflow each time, it can get pretty high pretty fast. And that's one of the first questions I always ask if I see somebody's plant suffering, if they're growing in most systems. I'll ask, like, have you measured your runoff EC and what was your input? And sometimes they're just like, I'm not measuring at all, or they'll be like, it's 3.5, and I'm like, oh, I'd try and get it to 1.5. And then they do, and then things tend to start getting a lot happier really fast. So that's all I got to say about that. But I'm curious if anybody else has any thoughts on that one before we get to what about Bob's question. Sounds like no. So we'll go ahead, and I can actually take this one. It's a pretty straightforward one. What about Bob? Does overwatered soil prevent nutrient uptake? Like if you flushed, in the meaning, like if you gave a ton of water at one time and you just completely soak the soil, does that create nutrient lockout? And I would say typically if you're flooding the plant where it has so much water, it's hard to take up actual oxygen. It needs to have like the right oxygen content of the water. So the water has to be the proper temperature. And as long as that's proper, then you might be a little bit better off. But even then, if you're just like going to continue to follow it up, like even never let it dry out, it's not like a rice paddy or something like with cannabis. Like it can't just stay wet the entire time in a peat-based or soil-based medium. So it needs to have some access to water, unless you have like the most aerated soil of all time, which is probably not super likely that even with 100% water content in there that it's going to thrive. So long story short, I guess, is if you waterlog a soil, it's going to have difficulties taking up not only nutrients, but more specifically, even like water and oxygen, two things that it vitally needs. And so it'll suffer and potentially just die off.
Yeah. I agree with all of that.
Yeah, it's going to be a bad situation for your roots. They're going to start dying off, and you're going to have bad nutrient uptake just because of that, because of the less roots.
And if you do, one of the issues with some of these nutrient lines that we were talking about that recommend growers flush all the time, if you don't have good drainage and you have to flush like in peat, that is going to be, a lot of water without, just make sure, I think the lesson here is almost always like, make sure you have good drainage. And if you're growing in big containers, make sure you have a lot of sort of aeration or draining type material in there. Because otherwise your water is going to get sort of waterlogged and hypoxic at some point.
Most plants I see, like if you go to like Home Depot, Lowe's, any nursery, it's like well draining soil. Like unless you're growing it like a succulent or something that really you want it maybe to hold a little bit of water, and you're going to give it a tiny amount of water every now and then. But like most flowers and plants, like even tomatoes, you want a good well draining soil because roots like to have access to oxygen. That's one thing that we don't think of. That's 68 degrees. Like there's a golden window, and it's like 68 to like maybe 72. But any higher than that, you're really pushing that oxygen level down to the point where the plant's not going to get as much as it would if you get into the proper temperature range. So keep those roots happy. Bigger the roots, bigger the fruits. People have said that one for a long time. I've never seen a plant with a huge, healthy root ball and giant root system tend to not perform well. So it's like if its roots are happy, the plant is almost always happy as long as you can keep things dialed in. That's
and the opposite is true too. If you've got a little scrawny plant that just never did what like its sisters did, like excavate the roots later and they'll be scrawny little underdeveloped roots. there's that. Yeah,
it's definitely a good indication of plant health, I would say, for sure. The American one somebody asked the American one, do other plants experience the bolt, or is that only induced due to abrupt change in light cycle, which indoor cannabis cultivators introduce? I've seen bolting in like lettuce and things like that because of temperature. So I know what happens in there. I saw a hydroponic lettuce facility where they had all the lettuce like floating around on the little like foam basically. And they got way too hot one time and all their lettuce bolted, and it was like way less valuable. It tastes worse and it was like wilty.
Well, hold on. That's because you harvest lettuce in its vegetative state. So you don't want it to flip to its reproductive state. And yeah, the whole mix of flavors will change in a crop like lettuce or spinach if it bolts, if it sends off that flowering stalk. But that's not to say that it's a bad thing that happened to the lettuce necessarily. Like if we let lettuce be lettuce and live its lettuce life, it's going to eventually want to bolt and send off a flower and have, lettuce sex and create little lettuce offspring. That's what the lettuce wants to do. So that bolting process is, I just want to say, lots and lots of plants go through a really vigorous period of growth as they enter reproductive growth. My favorite example are the yucca that will just be this like spiny looking bush for now 7-8 years, and then suddenly throw off a 20-foot tall like tree comes growing out of this thing in like 2 weeks. This like 20-foot tall tree will grow out of this like out of a yucca. If you don't live in a part of the country that happens to.
Are those planted all around Southern California? Because I'm pretty sure I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yes,
like that's a yucca. They plant them
like
all over the place around here, and you see like 10 of them side by side, and the one that sprouts, it looks like the ones that are unsprouted. It looks like a little like kind of cone shaped thing, and you could see where it's gonna eventually flower.
Yeah,
and make this giant tower.
So they make agave or tequila out of the agave, and what they do is they'll tie off the leaves around that center stalk to prevent it from bolting, because the plant starts storing sugars to like power the bolt, that growth, and send off this stalk. And it's actually those sugars which we make like agave sweetener or tequila or mezcal or whatever. The farmers like prevent the plant from bolting so that it traps those sugars in as long as possible, and then they cut it out. But yeah, that like a lot of different plants, and oftentimes our commercial crops, we want to harvest them before they bolt. just like the lettuce, because has anybody seen lettuce that bolts? It's got like this stalk out of the middle and these kind of like flowery looking things. Like that's not what you want on your salad. It doesn't taste good.
No, and I think it's cool though that lettuce, how we cultivate it for edible consumption or whatever, they get multiple harvests per year. Oftentimes, like the lettuce growers, they go out there and I've seen this like thing. It's like a soft kind of brush, and this guy just kind of like it almost looks like a lawnmower for his lettuce, and he just like pushes it over and it just harvests his lettuce for him. He does it a couple times a year on like a little quarter-acre plot or whatever. You could get a lot of lettuce. It's pretty productive in a small place, but you really have to like lettuce and doing things like that for salad. So,
I
but
think a lot of the brassicas do that. My brassica bed, I'll usually leave one plant of each one. I'll just let them bolt on purpose, and then they'll be seed for next year. I'll collect it and I'll have it for the next year.
that's
Especially for
smart.
plants that are doing good.
They're acclimated to your area. I mean, they like your soil, and it becomes almost like a little generational thing that you could pass down to like your kids or just grow in your area and know that you're gonna have some success because it did well the season before. It's fairly likely it's gonna do well in the same climate next year. We actually don't have any other questions, so curious if anything's on your guys' mind. How's the garden, Spartan Grown? I know you do a lot of non-cannabis gardening and other things like that, and you got a few minutes here before you got to get running off the Michigan Bros Grow Show. So I'm just curious about the non-cannabis garden updates.
I haven't, yeah, my non-cannabis garden is cold and frozen right now, so we'll wait for that to unthaw before I can do much. But my first
Do you start
task will
anything
be-
indoor?
No, I don't do any of that stupid. No, if I'm gonna get anything started, I'll go to the greenhouse and buy one already started. I'm not for vegetables, man. Come on. When I can go pay $1 for a plant.
I just didn't know because where you're at in Michigan, where I'm at in Ohio, like we would get this weird double, triple winter. So like you'd get snow as early as like Halloween, and then it would
Yeah.
snow through like, you might get a white Christmas, but then you might not because it's like, fuck you. We're not going to give you the white Christmas. But then January, it's like 70, 80 degrees. And then in February, it starts snowing through March. Like, what is going on? So it's got to
Yeah,
be
that
tough.
happens. That happens. I don't put anything in the ground that I care about until, probably middle of May or June even. But yeah, but that's the cool thing is the cold weather plants like the brassicas, they do well in cool weather. You can get away with getting them out there a little earlier. But those things, like I like to just seed straight into the beds and let them just seed right out of the beds. I'm a pretty laid back vegetable gardener. I don't take it extremely seriously. And if they want to plant themselves, that's cool. Well, that's even better. That's less work for me. So I had like 4 times as many tomato plants as I needed last year because these other ones just sprouted up from last year where a tomato must have fallen or whatever. And I'm just like, fuck it. I like those tomatoes from last year. I just let them grow. And so I just put a tomato cage around them wherever they sprouted. And I had way too many tomatoes. But, I just take what nature gives me, man. And it's fucking fun.
I
So I'm
learned
just
a
having
new
fun
word
out
today
there.
based on tomatoes. It's called, I'm probably mispronouncing it, vivipari, vivipary, I think.
Viviparous, vivipary.
So
Yeah.
this is when a plant has like a tomato, has seeds within it, and they start to sprout within the actual tomato before it's like
Yeah.
even out of the tomato. And I
Yeah.
saw somebody's like,
Yeah.
nature is awesome, and it had like 4 sprouts coming out of their tomato, and they wrote vivipary. So I like Googled it. I'm like, oh, cool, I learned a new word today. I knew that tomatoes did that. I've even seen people take cannabis seeds, put it into a tomato, and germinate it that way. So
I've seen cannabis seeds germinating out of an old
Right
bud.
on the plant.
Yeah, right on
Yeah.
the plant.
on the plant,
I've
yep,
seen it on
that.
I've seen on strawberries too. They can get viviparous. And
Yeah,
that's what with like sharks, for example, sharks are viviparous. Ovoviviparous? I'm forgetting now. There's a bunch of different terms for that kind of stuff. But yeah.
Fascinating, for sure. And but yeah, Spartan Grown, it's about that time where you got to refill the tray, take care of the dogs, and do all that good stuff before you head on over to the Michigan Bros Grow Show. Any final thoughts before you give your shout outs?
I just want to thank everybody for coming and coming together like we've been. It's really great to see us still doing it, man. This was the very first show for me, and we're still here, and we're pretty much the original cast. So I love that we're still out here, we're still doing it, and I just pat everybody on the back for continuing to do it because it's not easy, and there's a lot of shows that have tried and haven't been able to get the length that we have, and so pat your guys selves on the back. I think that's cool. That should be special. And shout out to the chat because it's a lot of the same names in chat too the whole time, following us for the whole journey. So it's cool to see, and it's cool to see it grow. You know, I'm not discounting the new faces either. I'm happy to see them. So just I'm just leaving with positive vibes. Shout out shout out everybody. And you can catch me on the Michigan Bros Grow Show coming up here in 15 minutes. Other than that, much love and keep growing.
Always a
What's
pleasure
up,
having you, Spartan.
Spartan?
Thank you.
Keep growing.
Awesome, dude. Always thankful to have Spartan on the show and everybody here on this panel. Like he said, it's been a long time. I mean, we're coming up over. I think we're about to hit our 4-year, maybe.
I
But
think we're over 4, or today's our 4-year anniversary.
Boom.
It's like damn
Oh,
near,
yeah.
isn't it?
wait, no, I
Is
think
it-
it literally is.
Is it
204?
literally
No, wait,
this
it's
date?
I think 208 would be because 52 times 4. But date wise, we're probably past
Oh.
4 years because we missed like a few
I
weeks.
thought it was the end of February in 2019.
That sounds right.
I always thought it was longer than that. You know, it feels longer. Feels like it's longer, but
It
yeah.
feels like torture. Matthew's like,
It's weird because this past few years has been like a time warp. Like at the same time, it feels like it's been
Yeah.
going slow. It also feels like, wow, it's already been 3 years since that thing started or whatever. And it's just like,
this
Holy
being
cow.
this being a 4-year long show. Yeah, and I echo Spartan sentiments. Like, good on us for staying with it and showing up every week. And yeah, so I'm happy to be part of it.
Noah the grower. I know you also grow non-cannabis things. Are you is it too cold? I actually saw snow there. You I think sent a thing saying that like the highways got shut down. So what's going on in the Pacific Northwest up there?
We had more snow than we've had in one day than we've had since World War II, 11 inches. And
Heard about
as
that.
far as man, it was crazy. And they're predicting more snow tonight, so we'll see. But I'm thankful my son got in a wreck last night and totaled his car, but he's all right. That kid's got 9 lives. But as far as the plants, I have a tent, a 2x4 tent that I bought for my wife, and she gets the seeds and she loves it. And it's just a hobby for us. You know what I mean? It's a little bit cheaper and we start everything inside and we get vegetables sooner than everybody else that just starts from seed outside around here. So that's why I kind of laughed when Smart was saying that, because I don't think I probably would, but my wife is way into it. You know, she likes to use all the fresh organic stuff for cooking, and we're real health nuts. And yeah, we grow a big garden. I meant to last year throw some up on my Instagram. I will this year. So we got a pretty good garden. We have a pretty good spot. And I actually just added a raised bed to my backyard. I actually have another one I might raise too. And we were making our own soil, and yeah, we have a blast with it. We grow a lot of stuff other than other than weeds. So
That's awesome, man. I think it's cool in places that are cold and maybe the weather isn't permitting for most of the year that you can grow yourself some food inside with the modern LED lights. Like they're efficient enough, and producing your own food versus buying it can actually be comparative value. And you also just know what's being put onto it and the pesticides and stuff that are not going onto it. Because even in organics, there's a ton of approved pesticides that maybe you wouldn't want to use yourself or necessarily even think that are on there. So if as much as you can limit that, I think is good. And also just the hobby of it is really a beautiful thing. I'm glad that your wife got into it, and anybody that I'm trying to do it more myself. That's why I always encourage it. And then the more I see others do it, the more I push myself to keep up with them. And I think even like you were saying, the amount of snow since World War II, I think back in those days, they were talking about victory gardens and, you know, growing food for keeping America successful and keeping people alive and healthy. Because when a bunch of people are off and doing things, or when climate, environment, whatever it is, things get bad, it's good to have local sources of fresh, healthy produce that you can sustain yourself off of and trade with your community. Have community gardens. We have a community garden in my city. It's beautiful. I need to participate. I want to pay for my little plot and go join up with those people. The time expense is definitely one thing, but if it's in your own, like if you have a home and you have a yard, you might be able to set yourself up a raised bed. I see a lot of people do it, like instead of having to buy 100 bags of soil to fill up a raised bed, they'll get like a bunch of recycled, you know, cardboard boxes and then like logs from a fallen tree, and they fill like the bottom half with stuff like that before they actually start dumping in compost and soil to mitigate the cost, and it becomes more of like a hugelculture style bed, and it can be less expensive to get started than a lot of people think. And it can be a really fun process. I'm growing plumeria right now for the first time, and it's one of my only non-cannabis plants that I'm growing, but it's a fun challenge to see like how well you can get into growing something. And one of my neighbors grows plumeria as well, and we've started bonding over it. So being part of the community is a great thing, whether it's the cannabis community or your general community around you, as much as we can. I think these past few years, a lot of people have gotten more divided, and the more we can come together and unify over whatever, I think is a good thing.
That's funny that you brought the hugel culture thing. I learned a little bit about that hugel culture from Full Duplex, watching some of the stuff that he was doing. He's in direct message with him. He sent me some stuff, and my little 5x5 raised bed I put in my backyard. We did that. We put down the leaves and the cardboard, and then we did the sticks, and just playing around with it and having fun with it. And hugel culture is a really cool rabbit hole to go down. And I love all that old school stuff.
It's effective, and I mean, cost saving is definitely undeniable. Like I've looked at even cheap soil at like the big box stores. If you start buying enough bags of it, it adds up. And if you're just trying to grow yourself something like some cucumbers or something, where if you go to the store and you buy them, they're actually pretty cheap. So the investment over time, you're going to grow garden year after year after year. Hopefully, you get set up and you enjoy it. So it's something that is a not like a one-time expense, but a lot of it goes into that first time getting started, getting the actual thing set up. But you can even use like recycled wood and things like that. I've seen people use like a drawer from an old dresser that they drill a hole
you shouldn't
into.
be using stuff with lacquer on it or anything. But there's another question, Jack, that someone's been asking like 3 times. I wonder if we could get to it.
I didn't see it. What did anybody
I'm
copy it in the
sorry.
chat?
I put it in the chat.
The air pressures.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless
If there's time, can you please talk about different air pressures and different pressures like tense, positive pressures, negative pressures, and the differentials? And I'll let somebody else take that because my wife is doing something for cooking.
All right, I'll jump in for a second.
It.
It depends on what you want your parameters. Like most things have a click on the rise. Like if the temperature goes above 80, it'll turn on the exhaust fan. And when it gets down to a certain there's usually a differential, like 4 or 5 degrees. When it gets down to that, it'll click off and then cycle. When it goes up to over 80, it'll turn on. When it goes to 75 or below, it'll turn off. And I like to have exhaust in my tent, so it's a negative pressure, like the sides suck in a little, because that will keep the smell from escaping if you're putting it through an air filter. As well as it has the airflow, it's getting exchanged and stuff. And then same thing with the humidity. If you have a humidifier or a dehumidifier, whatever you set the controls at is how it would work. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a whole lot easier to run a ventilated space with an exhaust fan. So when you're moving air through the space, you put the exhaust fan that sucks basically the humidity out, which is usually what the sort of environmental parameter that you need to worry about the most is in that situation. Heat too, but
and the heat
humidity is going to be a big one. But it'll suck both of those out, and you encourage the fresh air to come into the bottom of the tent. And like you said, the smell issue for a ventilated space, when you're running all of that air through a tent, then you don't want the neighbors to necessarily smell. Positive pressure we would use in a sealed room as, and Matthew could speak to this, in a sealed room as a IPM measure. Basically, if you're running a sealed space and it's well sealed such that you can sort of hold a positive pressure, then that'll prevent like insects and other things from being able to get into that space very easily, because air will be like rushing out through any of the little cracks rather than potentially seeping in through those cracks and kind of pulling insects with it. When we're running a ventilated space, we kind of like threw that candle out to the wind, because like we're cycling so much air through the tent anyways that like, we try to filter it or whatever. But so that's where I would use positive pressure, would be in a sealed room, and the primary goal there would be pest mitigation or IPM measure.
Great points. And anybody else have any thoughts on that before we go into our final thoughts and shout outs?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize what was already said, that what Dr. Coco said. I'll put that vote of confidence. Yeah, a big part of positive pressure is mostly trying to keep stuff from coming in easily as you enter into an area. And negative pressure will of course pull things in, and it's a cumulative effect, but obviously it's only important for some kinds of grows versus others, where like if you're in a greenhouse or something, it's a lot harder to hermetically seal. So yeah.
I've even seen from an IPM protocol to the extreme, it's not a positive pressure thing, but air being used to mitigate pest pressure. But they have like a jet kind of stream of air in a little room that blows on you before you enter the cultivation, which would potentially kill or knock off a lot of the pests that you might be able to bring in on your clothes, hair, shoes, whatever. So, and even like stepping into like little vats of like bleach and other like sticky mats and things like that before they go into the cultivation setting. So some cool thoughts on that. And with all that being said, I think I'll pass it first to Dr. MJ Coco.
Hey, cool. So yeah, I'm Dr. MJ Coco, cocoforcannabis.com. I was on the Garden Talk with Mr. Grow It this week. So check that out. It's a cool episode, just dropped yesterday. And I'm doing a new little show. I'll probably talk to you guys more about this next week. So look forward to sort of some more news about that. And yeah, I had a lot of fun in today's show. So I like when we get to do these Q&A shows. And yeah, thanks, Jack. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, the rest of the panel. And I said Matthew specifically because I felt bad still about the xylem phloem thing. I think you were totally right with what you were saying, and I should have just not interrupted. But I was worried, not so much about you were going to be wrong, but that people were going to get sort of construe it the wrong way. In any event,
I think you were right, though. No, don't worry about it. Thank you, though.
I appreciate all of you, and I'll be back next week. And yeah, grower love.
Great to have you. And next up, Matthew Gates.
Yeah, let me just emphasize that no hard feelings. And I do have a very optimistic outlook about people's interpretation of very technical stuff, and I think that sometimes I lose myself in that. So I definitely appreciate the clarification, although I was getting to it, but yeah, you're right. So you can check me out at zenthanol.com for professional inquiries. You can also check me out at my YouTube channel, Zenthanol. You can join my Patreon Discord through Patreon. And you can also find me on social media at SyncAngel on Twitter and Instagram. And I just dropped today one of my live stream edits from Instagram now on YouTube with a bunch of additional information. And this is from January 15th, and it's about how IPM can save you resources, time, money, and labor, whether you're commercial or non-commercial. So check that out if you're interested, and the Q&A video will be up soon as well. Thank you very much, everyone, and the chat was amazing with his questions, as always.
They really were, and I hate to say I wrote open panel second hour, but the questions were so good and we had so many of them, which is sometimes not the case with the Q&A. Sometimes it's like, we get a lot of the regulars and maybe they've gotten their questions out a couple weeks earlier. Things are going well for them. They're crushing it in their growth, so they don't have as many questions. But we got great ones tonight, and it kept us going the whole time. And I would have felt remiss to not answer all of them. And when we bring people onto the panel, it becomes more of a spotlight of their grow. So I'm glad that we were able to get through so much great questions tonight. And with that said, I want to pass it next to Noah the Grower.
Yeah, I had a great time today as well. Of course, a little debate as always with the some people call it flushing, I just call it water only. But I always say, hey man, if you don't need it, don't do it. What works for you works for you. What works for me works for me. And I had a great time as always. I'm Noah the Grower with 2 E's. You can find me on Instagram. And I'll see everybody next week.
Pleasure as always, Noah. I respect both sides of the debate always, and I think that everybody's opinion is valid here. And I'm glad that we all got to share. Like as adults, growers, we are a community, and we don't always have to necessarily agree 100% on everything. And I think that this is something that's going to be continued to be discussed and researched and looked at. And people will disagree with the research. I've seen flushing articles that have already been denounced by all the growers out there. So they're going to do more research, and then that will get denounced. And then I think eventually it'll come to a place where people are going to be like, all right, here's what's actually happening. Here's really what.
Yeah, you can't logic people out of an emotional response.
This is true. But I
Try to
think
say might.
it was a great discussion. I really enjoyed all aspects. So many great questions. Thank you so much to the chat. And I want to next pass it over to the American one, our last panelist of the evening.
Jack, thanks for hosting again, panel. It was good to see everyone. Everyone in chat, thanks for coming, hanging out. I'm the American one on the YouTube and the American one _ Keens on the IG. If you want to hit me up for anything. And yeah, it was really good, interesting stuff today. And yeah, I'll say, you know, we should define flushing the next time we have this great argument on this stuff, because that could change the whole entire thing, right?
It could totally change the whole thing. I so agree with that, Tao.
The semantics.
So,
Like, what do we mean when we say flush?
Right. So that's another thing. And yeah, it's good to have these discussions because, you know, we learn stuff and we figure stuff out. So I love coming here and hanging out with you guys and everyone in chat. So it was good to be here. I'm glad. I'm sorry I was late. And yeah, that's about it. Peace out, everyone. Have a great week.
Better late than never. We're always glad to have you. And the other thing was we had 7 of the 9 tonight. And, you know, a lot of people are busy and not always able to make it, but I always appreciate when we can have such a full panel of the regular panelists. So thank you guys for showing up tonight. And thank you to all the chatters for asking great questions. Really appreciate that. I really just can't emphasize enough. Like, we answered a ton of questions tonight and got through a lot of content, and even the panelists ask great questions as follow-ups too. So thank you all for coming. And I really look forward to seeing you all next week. If you want to find me, Jack_Greenstock on Twitter is my new kind of primary place that I'll communicate, but I'm also on Instagram at Jack Greenstock, like you can see here on the logo. If you want to email me, if you're one of those people who's not on social media, jackgreenstock47@gmail.com. And my website is 50strains.com. So thank you all so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, drop that like, and we'll see you all next week. Peace and love.
Grow love, everyone.
Keep growing.